All right. Um, Good morning, or dzień dobry, I suppose, in Polish. I'm Sylvain Delers. I'm the chief scientist at Carbon Gap. We are really glad to host this session today to launch the Carbon Removal Readiness Assessment for Poland. I'll give some introductory words and then hand it to my colleagues at Sweco in particular. Maybe, Martina, you can move to the next slide. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you. Today, as I was saying, we are launching a new study that has been prepared over the past months between Carbon Gap and Sweco. Let me first say a word about who we are, Carbon Gap. Carbon Gap is a European non-profit focusing on carbon dioxide removal. It was created at the end of 2021. We are about 20 people, and we have a mix of scientific expertise and policy expertise. The mission of the organization is to support the development of carbon removal capacity in Europe, particularly by building the right policy mix and incentives. So we produce studies, policy recommendations, and we collaborate with a wide network of organizations, as you can see at the bottom of the screen, to try to advance CDR policy as fast as we can, to essentially try to hit the targets that the IPCC has laid out in their last assessment report, number 6, where, as you may know, we clearly need to deploy multiple gigatons of carbon dioxide removal by 2050 or net zero. So that's the end goal. Yeah, maybe. So I encourage everyone to check our website if you want to know more about what we do. And let's move in then. So some context for this carbon dioxide removal assessment that we are publishing today. So essentially for the countries, one of the questions that is now very prominent in the climate transition is what do we do with CDR, right? And now that it is clear that it's an important component to hit net zero and then mostly for some countries also to go net negative. So I guess there are two main questions for decision makers at national level. One is, first of all, how much CDR should we plan for, right? And so far, most targets that exist are at global level, as the ones I mentioned, for example, from the IPCC. So it's a little bit hard to understand what each country should be doing if we want to collectively hit the targets. So we have explored that question at Carbon Gap with a tool called the CARE calculator. You can find it on the webpage of the organization. And it essentially tries to do exactly that, break down the global target into national targets based on different principles. And it's not prescriptive. The user can explore different ways of allocating the effort, let's say, and that translates into national targets for CDR. We'll come back to that towards the end of the presentation. Then the second question is, how much can we do actually? Because of course, that's an important element, also in setting a realistic target. And so here as well, I think there is clearly a lack of granular information for national decision makers. And that's what the carbon removal readiness assessments are trying to fill in, to bridge that gap. So as you will see later in the presentation, the report is very much targeted to providing a clear and auditable assessment of what a given country could do to deploy different CDR methods based on local resources mainly. Right. And again, if we think of this national decision maker, once you have the responses to these two questions, there might be a gap. You might be able to deploy more than you need, in which case you can provide CDR credits to neighboring countries, for example, or you may have not enough capacity. And the adjustment for these two question then would come through international credits and markets, in particular through Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. So again, these questions are important already today, also to understand for each country how dependent they might be on these international credit trading mechanisms, and therefore where are the opportunities to develop local and domestic capacity to potentially export credits. All right. Then zooming on the carbon removal readiness assessment themselves. So this is a big project that Carbon Gap has been operating for now more than 2 years. In the phase one, we covered Norway, France, and the UAE, and we are now wrapping with this report phase two, where we covered another 5 countries in Europe, Poland being one of them. So the main objective, as I was describing for these reports, is first to close the information gap. So right now, if Polish decision makers want to create a plan and organize around CDR to deploy national capacity and leverage the opportunities that exist with the local resources, but also local value chains. They miss information to understand where they should go, what they should prioritize. The CRA reports will provide this information, as you will see in the results. The intention with that is also to trigger more and inform national planning. CDR is clearly a new industry. A lot of the methods are new and they are deployment sort of times that we can't compress or negotiate with. And that's why it's very important already today to organize, plan, and regulate so that the sector can scale. It has to scale very, very fast if we want to hit the targets suggested by the IPCC. So the reports are very much oriented to that as well and support decision makers in planning for CDR already today. Third objective that I think has worked very well in all the countries during the preparation of the report is to platform the topic. CDR is a topic that is still a bit niche. The level of awareness, even in Europe, is still quite low. And so preparing the report, engaging with the stakeholders was a great opportunity to talk about CDR and spread information and develop awareness. And finally, with the methodology that Carbon Gap has developed, we now have a series of reports that are comparable because they were generated with the same methodology, which is also very important and valuable. For example, for EU decision makers, because then they can aggregate the data and have a better view of what is achievable at EU level between now and 2050, for example. With that, I think I hand it to you, Martina, for the methodology.
Yes, thanks a lot, Sylvain, and good morning, everybody. So now we enter more into the methodology part and then into the results. I'll walk you through the carbon removal readiness assessment methodology that we have used in this phase two for 5 countries and then previously for other 3. And then that will be inside a toolkit that we published in the next couple of months. Then I'll pass it on to Heini to present the results of the Polish report specifically, and then again to Sylvain for the final remarks on the results. So in terms of methodologies, what we are using is a standardized model that we are replicating for each country. It's a bottom-up approach. So essentially, we are analyzing the current resources of the countries and looking at the official projections of how the resources are going to develop over time, generally up to 2050 if the data is available. And the resources that we look at, for example, energy, water, land, CO2, geological storage, CO2 infrastructure, and biomass and minerals. So what we do is that we have developed together with our partners, RMI, a way to convert the resources to net ton CO2 removed. And this is going to be presented in the database of resource requirements that is going to be part of the toolkit. So based on the resources of the country and based on these coefficients that are used to convert to tons of CO2 removed, we then develop a theoretical potential, which is a maximalist estimation of how much CDR could be deployed in the country if the country was in a sort of wartime effort to fight climate change. So a really big effort to try to reach net zero and net negative. And this you will see in the report is presented in chapter 4. Of course, this is not realistic. So what then the model does is to analyze the social geography part of the country. And this is made of three main components. One is desk research on, for example, the existing policies in the country, so the legal frameworks, the processes, the current incentives, and then also the structure of the economy, the political landscape, the human capital, and the consideration at the cultural, religious, and ethical level. This is part of the desk research, and then we layer an analysis that is instead more pragmatic with targeted stakeholder interviews, generally 15, and then a citizen panel with about 30 participants to gather their understanding of CDR, their awareness, their knowledge of the methods, but also how when exposed to information, their perception of carbon dioxide removal changes. And with the stakeholder interviews, instead, we look at how what is the perception based on the country specifically. Heini will give the results for Poland later on. So together with these components of the social geography plus the bottom-up part of the theoretical estimates, we then try to layer some more conservative estimates for the resources. For example, it might be that in the theoretical potential, the energy is very high, renewable energy is very high, but actually based on the stakeholder interviews, we see that by 2030 and 2050 actually should be discounted significantly. So this is done for each resource, and then several assumptions are created to then build the realistic potentials that Heini will explain. For Poland, there are two. Then, as part of this toolkit, there's also the actionable roadmap, which is what a country is advised to do. And this is something that hasn't been done for Poland this time, but it has been done, for example, in this phase for Germany, Spain, and Finland. And this is the roadmap work starts from the conclusions of the background report. And then layers the results of a workshop that is done with the selected stakeholders to together co-design how to reach the realistic potentials defined in the report. And then it is published. To give you an idea of who is behind this project, so it's been funded by the Grantham Foundation, and then Carbon Gap works with local partners, in this case, Sweco, to prepare the Carbon Removal Readiness Assessment for the country. Great. In terms of what we look at, carbon removals is made of a large diversity of methods. This is the classification that we use at Carbon Gap, and you can see there are about 16 methods divided into four categories: enhanced ecosystem management, biomass conversion and preservation methods, geochemical carbon removal methods, and synthetic carbon removal methods. And all these methods vary in terms of technological readiness, as you can see in the first line at the bottom. Also in terms of durability and storage duration that spans from decades to hundreds of millennia. And then differ also in terms of reversal risk, all of them. So these methods are all considered at the beginning of the assessment, and then, as Heini will explain, some of them are excluded based on for example, the geography of the country. Great. I'm going now to pass it on to Heini.
Martina, can I just, I wanted to jump in, sorry, but just because I realized maybe we haven't really said why Poland, right? Why did we pick Poland? And so I think for this report initially, because we had limited number of reports we could do, We were particularly interested in those countries combining a high theoretical potential and potentially low level of awareness or low level of policy development, where this report, we believe, can make a big difference. And I think Poland is a prime example of such countries. And that means there are important assets for Europe to develop significant CDR capacity. So that's the reason for selecting Poland. Over to you, Amy.
Thank you, and welcome also on my behalf. Nice to see you all online. My name is Heini Vassinen, and I'm representing Sweco here. And I will go through the results of the assessment that we did for Poland. Maybe I could firstly introduce Sweco briefly. We are a leading engineering and consultant company in Europe. We have roughly 22,000 colleagues in northern parts of Europe. And the part of Sweco that was involved in this particular assessment is representing our sustainability consulting. So we support both the private companies and also the public sector across a wide range of sustainability topics. So we work a lot with climate change mitigation and adaptation, and also in a growing manner, biodiversity and nature questions, efficient and smart use of resources, and promoting circular economy, and then also renewable and clean energy. And with the private companies, we help them to advance sustainable growth and sustainable business. And then on the public sector, their role in advancing more sustainable society and also developing like vitality of different areas together with the governments, cities, and regions. And in this project, we had a wide range of different sustainability experts involved. And we worked together with Carbon Gap on assessments for Finland, Germany, and Poland. And that is why we had also in this Poland report a team of Finnish and Polish experts working together. So I acted as a project director for all of the 3 country reports on our side and led the project together with Riina Pursiainen, who acted as a project manager. And the core team of our Polish colleagues consisted of Agata Skorka and Monika Marek, who did the heavy lifting in terms of the data collection, policy understanding, and then also organizing the interviews and citizen panel. And they were supported with colleagues such as Marcin Sierpits and also Marcin Gawronski, who brought in their sustainability expertise. And then they were supported by a team of Finnish colleagues who were also familiar with the method that we used here and supported with the data collection and actually then calculating the potential. So for example, Anna-Elina Vilén, who is our climate specialist, helped out with the biomass-based calculations especially, and Nina Svinhuvud, our energy specialist, contributed to the energy part of the assessment and also calculation of those methods that require storage capacities. And then there were also other colleagues outside this core team involved in different parts of the work. So this was very much a team effort. But then if moving on to the actual results, as Martina mentioned, there were many CDR methods that we looked at. So I will firstly go through that what were the selected ones, and then give a few mandatory disclaimers and assumptions that were used so that you understand the characteristics of the study and also the limitations that we had. And then we will move on to the actual results. So what could be the carbon removal potential in Poland, looking at the different scenarios, after which I will share some key findings and insights that we gathered from the stakeholder interviews and citizen panel. But if looking first at the selected CDR methods, so we had methods included all of the 4 buckets, and mostly we had methods from the ecosystem management, since there are vast forest and agricultural land areas in Poland, and also the peatlands, which could be suitable for carbon sequestration. The only one excluded was blue carbon or the coastal revegetation, and this is due to that Poland has a relatively short coastline along the Baltic Sea, which limits the potential. And there is also still, let's say, limited research available on how this method could be applied on Polish coastal environment, and also that what is the actual potential of the particular method. Then also on the biomass conversion methods, there are plenty of different kind of biomasses available for carbon removals in Poland. And also you have your own geological storage. So for example, bioenergy with carbon capture and storage is a very potential method for Poland, and was included along with biochar and durable bio-based products, which could store carbon to the assessment. The excluded methods, terrestrial biomass burial and marine biomass sinking and bio-oil, which is a byproduct of biochar, those were excluded as they still represent a low technology readiness level. So due to the insufficient sort of data of their effectiveness, they were left out. And the geochemical methods where one uses different minerals to remove carbon are also suitable for Poland. So those were included. The carbon mineralization was included also in terms of the in situ mineralization. The ozone fertilization and artificial upwelling as methods are not suited to Polish marine ecosystems and are currently constrained by both regional and international legal framework. So those were excluded from the assessment. Out of the synthetic methods, the direct air capture, carbon capture and storage was included, but the one doing that directly from the oceans was excluded, as it's still relatively low in the technological readiness, and remains to be seen that how effective it could be, especially when applied to Poland. But nevertheless, majority of the methods included. Then if moving on to certain disclaimers, on the next slide, to understand sort of the nature of the study and the potential limitations. So firstly, about the scope that we have. So even though we did assess what could be realistic potential for carbon removals in Poland, and we took into account, for example, the technological deployment rates, economical constraints, regulatory development, we did not run a, let's say, full techno-economical assessment for different methods. And that means that the cost of individual methods was not factored in the assessment. Then, as already mentioned, some of the methods were excluded from the study as they are still low technological readiness level, or there is not enough research available to showcase the effectiveness of the methods, or they have limited applicability to Poland. Some of these methods that were excluded may also going forward prove to be non-viable, but others may mature faster than anticipated and provide additional potential for Poland. Then I would say that maybe the most important feature to understand is that the scenarios that we build showcases what could be possible pathways to deploy carbon removals in Poland, but they are not forecasts. So they are not saying that this will happen. It's more like that this could happen if actions and decisions are made accordingly. So we created 2 realistic scenarios to showcase the different pathways that what could be done in terms of carbon removals in Poland. Then lastly, a few major uncertainties that we had for the study. First one is related to the land use sector. And so far, the LULUCF sector is reported in Poland's national greenhouse gas inventory as a net carbon sink. However, we found studies that suggest that, for example, emissions from the peatlands might be underestimated due to conservative emission factors that are used for the calculation. I would say that the main uncertainty relates to natural forest carbon sinks, as projections on the future sinks are subject to considerable uncertainty, particularly due to that there was limited data or publicly available data on future harvest levels. So how those are going to develop, also the forest age structure and the impacts on climate change on the forests in Poland. So let's say that in the absence of that kind of robust scenario consistent projections, we adopted here simplified assumption that the forest sink remains on the same level as it been so far throughout 2030 and 2050, but this for sure includes major uncertainties that how it will actually develop in the future. And the same goes for the geological CO2 storage. There is potential for it is significant in Poland, but considering that and there is also CCS project underway already, but developing the storage projects takes time, and due to uncertainties, for example, related to the regulatory development, economics, technology development, there is uncertainties that on which scale the capacity will be scaled up going forward. Then if moving on to how we did the assessment, Martina already opened up the methodology, but maybe just to add from the Poland specific. So to assess and calculate carbon removal potential, we mapped here the different resources, as Martina mentioned, and then converted those to removed CO2 tons. And in case of Poland, we collected data on renewable electricity, waste heat, biomasses, both forest and agricultural based, land areas, minerals, and geological storage capacity. And we collected data that what are the resources today in Poland, how they are likely and how they are likely to develop in the future. And we used different kind of country reference scenarios and data sets such as Poland's updated draft National Energy and Climate Plan, Poland's 2050 development concept and national greenhouse gas inventory, and then also, for example, variety of publications from the main statistics office. And then based on the different data that we gathered to showcase that what is the resources now and in the future, we also took into account that, okay, what is the priority uses besides carbon removals for those resources, and to what other uses they are likely to be used going forward. And the remaining share acted as a pool of resources available theoretically and realistically for CDR potential. And this we also sort of assessing the available resources or deployed resources for carbon removals was then cross-checked against the expert and shareholder interviews. And as mentioned, we firstly crafted the theoretical potential, which is a bit like a crazy scenario that what if after the priority use, everything would be directed towards the carbon removals. This sort of sets like the upper boundary for the potential and is sort of for context only in terms of the assessment. And then based on that, we had two practical scenarios for 2030 and 2050, showcasing different pathways, one with the more, let's say, modest ambition to deploy carbon removals, and one with the more high ambition, sort of reflecting the climate neutrality targets. And the outcome was a different sort of a portfolio of methods, which were formed in a way that we allocated the different resources in a most optimal way. So what's the sort of, let's say, biggest potential for carbon removals with these available resources? And then the result of that was portfolio of methods showcasing that what could be the optimal mix of different methods to make best out of the available resources. And the method, as Martina mentioned, is designed to be as transparent as possible. So we have captured in the report all of the assumptions that we have used, different steps that we have taken, and the path from the inputs to outputs should be as auditable as possible. And here is it's a busy slide, but I will just go through the logic. This is to showcase in practice that what we did with converting the resources to carbon removal potential. So for example, in terms of the biomasses, we took a very granular look on different kind of agricultural residues and those biomasses stemming from the forests. And first, for both of those, evaluated that, okay, what is the total amount of different biomasses, and then what is the priority uses for those. And after that, what could be theoretical as a wartime effort directed towards carbon removal. And then based on those figures, we turned into more, let's say, realistic approach that, okay, after the priority uses, what's left and what could be realistically, considering the social geography, regulatory environment, economic constraints, what could be then deployed actually for carbon removals in both of the scenarios, low ambition and high ambition. So then we ended up with the, let's say, more modest resources available than in the theoretical scenario. And then, for example, in case of biomasses, we didn't use in the calculation all of the biomasses available because, for example, in BECCS, bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, you need both biomasses and CO2 storage. And the storage is a more limiting resource than biomasses. So it sort of ended up to be the more constrained resource, and we didn't sort of use in the calculation actually all of the biomasses that we thought that could be realistically available for CDR. Then another example is the CO2 storage capacity, where we first considered that, okay, what is the theoretical availability? And there is a different kind of studies available showcasing that, okay, what could be theoretically Poland's geological storage capacity. We assumed here a figure of 2 gigatons to be available, and then sort of estimated that, okay, if it starts to be scaled up from 2030 onwards, what is the annual injection capacity by 2050 if everything and all storage would be directed towards carbon removals. And then also that, okay, what could be the export capacity? Then to assess the realistic availability, we considered more realistic view on the deployment rate. So how the storage capacity could actually be scaled up, and then also considered that some of the capacity or some of the capacity will be, to start with, be prioritized for fossil-based CO2 from those industries where there are these kind of hard to abate emissions that are very difficult to mitigate with emission reduction actions, but the carbon should be captured and stored. So based on this sort of assessment, also here, we ended up a much more modest and realistic assumptions that what is the capacity available. So on the short term, we assume that there is no own domestic geological storage capacity available in Poland. And if there was, it's prioritized for CCS. and the same goes for export capacity. But then going towards 2050, there would be from 4 to 10 megatons available for carbon removals. For the export capacity, we assume that since you have significant domestic capacity, there is likely not happening carbon removal or sort of export CO2 capacity for carbon removals. But this was 2 examples of how we moved in the resource allocation sort of from theoretical to realistic. And then to the actual results. Just to recap on the next slide, we had 2 scenarios built out. So scenario A showcased low ambition, so like a business as usual, limited efforts are made to deploy carbon removals. And concretely, assumptions, for example, on electricity availability for carbon removals were aligned with the National Energy and Climate Plans with existing measures scenario. Then the other pathway showcased a more high ambition approach to deploy carbon removals. So this pathway would require that the CDR is deployed at a greater scale, and it means that there needs to be targeted and decisive decisions and actions to promote the different methods. And here, for example, the assumptions on electricity available for CDR was aligned with the climate plans with additional measures scenario. Then the actual results vary between from 47 to 85 megatons. So in the low ambition scenario, there is only a modest growth from 47 megatons in 2030 up to 56 megatons in 2050, whereas in the high ambition, the growth is much more significant from 55 megatons in 2030 up to 85 megatons in 2050. And then if looking at the more, let's say, granular look at the results, here are the graph showcasing on the left-hand side both scenarios on the 2030 and then both scenarios 2050. And here you can see that firstly, that there is a lot of different colors showcasing that the different pathways consist of diverse portfolio of CDR methods covering all the 4 categories that we introduced earlier. And also what I mentioned on the last slide, that the graph also showcases the difference between the different scenarios. So the potential grows significantly higher in the high ambition scenario on a long-term basis. On a short term, the portfolio consists mostly of nature-based solutions, and in 2050, especially in the high ambition scenarios, the share of technical removal method grows. And otherwise, there is no, let's say, one silver bullet method or one method dominating the results apart from the forest natural carbon sink. So you can see that even in the scenario with the highest potential, the forest natural carbon sink represents half of the overall potential, and the sink comes with uncertainty. So that's something to note. We added here also as a gray background, or the gray line here, the, let's say, assumed residual emissions in Poland, which were concluded based on the studies we found. So this showcases the gap between the emission reduction actions and the climate neutrality target that could be or should be filled with carbon removals. And basically in all of the scenarios, apart maybe the short-term scenarios, the gap could be filled with the carbon removals. So I think those were the major conclusions out of those. And then if really briefly still going through the stakeholder interviews and citizen panel findings, as it was mentioned, we interviewed 15 stakeholders and their views on current climate ambitions in Poland, their knowledge and views on the different methods and barriers and enablers on deploying the carbon removals. And here are also the share of institutes interviewed. Then we had a citizen panel consisting of common people sharing their views on what do they know about carbon removal methods, what worries them, and their thoughts on advancing carbon removals in Poland. This was to a bit get a glimpse at what is the social license or social acceptance for different methods. And finally, just to conclude, both the stakeholders and also the panel call for stronger policy and incentives for carbon removals, and also the increased knowledge and data for CDR. So on the governance and policy side, I think the strongest message was that there is a lack of comprehensive and long-term climate strategy, and also that even though there are existing projects to advance carbon capture and storage, there is a lack of CO2 storage and infrastructure. And also on the incentive side, it was brought up that there is a limited access to finance and lack of mechanisms to support pilots and scaling of innovative solutions, and also concerns that delaying the energy transition could lead to, let's say, limited access to, for example, EU funds. And then there was also mentioned that there is a maybe overall low level of knowledge and understanding of different CDR methods, and that they should really complement but not replace emission reduction actions. And overall, the preferred methods included BECCS and also the different nature-based solutions, as well as biochar, and the least favorable methods consisted of these kind of like a biomass sinking and burial. But these were the results in a nutshell. Over to you, Sylvain, to conclude the findings.
Yeah, thank you very much, Heini, for this detailed presentation. I hope this was clear for all the participants. So some words to conclude a little bit on these results. When we look at what Heini just presented, as she said, the high ambition scenario in particular reach almost 85 megatons per year by 2050, which in theory would be more than enough to cover the residual emissions and could even take the country to the negative earlier than expected. As you understand, this depends quite a bit on several strong assumptions, both on the resilience of the natural sink, but also on the capacity of the country to reduce emission fast enough to reach that low level of residual emissions. So that depends on these things. The low ambition scenario could also achieve that, but again, even more subject and dependent on the capacity of the country to decarbonize. So much more risky, I would say. And the net negative objective is important because it is already embedded in the EU law, but not yet in several member states. So I think there is a strong rationale for updating the climate strategy of the country and including already such an objective, because this visibility is highly valuable for investors and project developers. In terms of the constraint to reach these levels of carbon dioxide removal, as has been said, I think the two main ones might be the fit for purpose regulation, where there are still some gaps in Poland that should be fixed, and then the development, sufficiently rapid development of transport and storage infrastructure for CO2, which could become a game changer, both for Poland, but also for neighboring countries, some of them not having access to such a resource. So this is a really key one. Maybe to be fast, yeah, I think like in other countries, this is a typical picture in terms of public license to develop these new activities. There is a basis and people understand when they are exposed to information, but typically the information on CDR is very scarce. So there is an exercise to be conducted, particularly by local authorities, to progressively talk more about CDR showcase projects so that people can understand what it is, what is the function of CDR, and therefore maybe come up with their own initiatives as well in local territories. Maybe in the interest of time, I'll move to the next slides, Martina. Then if we start to zoom out a bit from those results, Yeah, I'll let you navigate. And put them again in context of the climate objective for Poland, but also the ones for the EU. Thank you. So as I mentioned in the introduction, we did that exercise to try to come up with an estimation of what could be meaningful national targets with the care calculator. And here on the screen, you have an outlook of what that looks for Poland. So you have different scenarios depending on the criteria you use to allocate the effort between the different countries. But what is interesting here is that if you look at the last two scenarios, we are talking about volumes of 90 to 114 megatons, let's say. I mean, broadly speaking, they are in the range of what could be achieved, maybe not exactly at 2050, but maybe right after. So Poland is apparently in a position to achieve such targets, different to other countries. I will use the example of Germany, where I think our report also identified the potential between in the 90, 100 megatons per year by 2050. Whereas the most the fairest scenarios for the allocation of the effort would translate into 300. So there is a gap for these countries sometimes to reach that capacity. Let's move to the next slide, please. Yeah, so in terms of the bottlenecks and what could be the next steps, we already mentioned that there have been recent very interesting developments in climate policy in Poland. Unfortunately, this is still not enough, particularly for CDR. So interesting to have mentions of BECS and DAX in the NECP, but we think that as in other countries, having a national strategy would be also very important. And we already mentioned transport and storage of CO2 as an important aspect. Unfortunately, the country has started to update its policy on that, but what we understand is that it is not yet effective, and so there is still some time that is passing by with these processes that is lost. And as we said, these processes are very time-consuming. So speeding up on these processes would be very valuable. Next slide, please, Martina, just to finish the presentation. And yeah. So these are areas of policy development that are important to keep in mind for Poland, but also for every country, really. So strategy and governance we already mentioned. It's about setting a direction of travel and a vision so that people can project and make final investment decisions in practice. Market formation is one that we work a lot at Carbon Gap. We need to have a clear demand signal if we want the activities to scale up. This has to be worked both at national and EU level. For some of you that are connected to this debate, there is the question of the integration into the ETS of CDR, for example. Very important that every country in Europe supports these sort of measures because they provide this visibility. So yeah, as Martina was saying at the beginning, for Poland, we didn't have a chance to run a roadmap workshop, which in theory is the follow-up from the report. Once we have a clear view on the potential, the idea is to gather national stakeholders and decision makers to lay out a roadmap on what are the required actions to scale the potential and develop the potential that we identified. So I think this is a clear next step for Poland, aggregate the CDI ecosystem and sit with decision makers to try to explore what that could look like and how that could be embedded in the already efforts that are conducted to improve climate policy in the country. Okay, with that, I think we are done with the presentation, yes. And so thank you very much to all of you for listening. And now is the time to open for questions. So if you have questions on the results, on what the report means, how it can be used, please raise your hand so that we can go in order and then we'll give you the mic. I also see some questions in the chat. So maybe I can start with this one while people collect their thoughts. So there's a question from Janus. What is the next step once the report is published? Do we plan further studies, educational campaigns, consulting Poland's politics and ministries in preparation of the national CDR strategy? So yes and no to this question. I mean, as I explained, yes, these are the obvious next steps. What is the problem? Is that Carbon Gap is only a 20 people organization, so it's hard for us to be present in every single member state. We are refocusing on member states, so we are doing more with the countries, particularly those where we have published the reports. But I think it's fair to say that in countries like Spain, Italy, Poland, for example, we very much rely on local allies or partners to do that. So yeah, maybe that's a good opportunity to make a bit of a call to anyone interested in this topic and to reach out to us. We are very interested to understand if there is already like a structured CDR community maybe that we can build on to engage in those actions. Because yeah, it would be great to be able to sit, have a workshop, build a roadmap. Educational campaigns, this is a longer job and massive job, so it can't be just us, but that's also very important indeed. Yeah, so I know if I answered the question, Jonas, otherwise feel free to take the mic. And then the second part was, what is your opinion on voluntary CRCF? Could it make a positive impact on CDR market, or rather just mandatory CDR targets and merging it with DTU? At Carbon Gap, we think that these things are very much complementary. So the CRCF, the value it has is that it set an official standard for certification, which was missing because for those of you who know the voluntary carbon market, at the moment is highly fragmented with a lot of different standards. So it's highly confusing, I would say, for everyone, project developers, but also buyers, which is an issue because and actually, we see that the VCM is sort of plateauing a little bit. So it's already showing signs of diminishing returns, let's say. So yeah, CSCF has this value. And then it was set up as a voluntary mechanism. But if you follow the discussions around the ETS, it is already anticipated that CSCF could become the stamp of approval for CDR units going into the ETS. So there is a bit of confusion around the real role of CSCF and what we call the use cases in the expert group. That is still to be cleared. But yeah, my answer would be very much complementary. CSCF will probably generate new demand. Last week in Brussels, where the CSCF days, where the Commission announced the CSCF Buyers Club, which is an initiative to pool demand and organize the buyers to facilitate CDR purchases on the back of the CSCF. So that's already an example. And I think it will probably take life progressively between now and the end of the year. And then, yeah, I think it's also fair to say that, yes, I think I agree with you, Janis, that the long game is definitely more on the side of compliance demand and like ETS. And interestingly, we see movement not only in the EU, but in other geographies as well, like Japan, California, and others. So there is also progress, slow, but there is progress as well on developing these more organized and compliance carbon markets. Any other questions? Just feel free to raise your hand and take the mic. We're happy to comment on the results, but also discuss with you on what the report means and where CDR can go next in Poland.
We have a question from Pavel. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the report. It's actually quite interesting, I have to say. And taking into account the whole methodology as well as the results for both of the scenarios. Referring a little bit to the question of Janusz that you already answered, we would invite you to join the ministerial working group on the CCUS strategy. Part of this ministerial work on the CCUS strategy that is right now in another round of consults within the members of the group, there is an attachment devoted solely to bioenergy CCS and the DAX. This has been published a week ago, which means that you did not have a chance to incorporate that in any way. Nevertheless, the results that you are showing for bioenergy CCS and direct air capture are far away from what was developed by COBISA. COBISA, I don't know if this is the national institution that does the modeling of the energy and economic system. And I get, when I was reading your report, I acknowledge the fact that it mostly comes from your assumptions on the side of the CO2 storage availability. And so the limitation of the role of bioenergy CCS comes from probably mostly from that. But as I understood, you are preparing to, correct me if I'm wrong, will be able to share the tool itself, like the calculator for redoing, let's say, those kind of analysis, or because it would be interested to try to align the assumptions from the national CCUS strategy, especially in terms of CO2 storage availability, and your model, and see if the share of bioenergy CCS would increase also in your model. So would it be in any way a preferable solution? Nevertheless, as I said, I will try to somehow incorporate the findings of your report in the work. The strategy is currently at council level. There are some recommendations from your document that are touching the subject of those two things that were important for us in the CCUS strategy, which is bioenergy CCS and direct air capture, right? But also, I guess until Poland will start working on its net zero strategy overall, the remaining CDRs, well, are hard for us to assess from that point, right? Because we're just focusing on the technological solutions. But as I said, we will try to work on that. I will try to take some kind of extract from your report on bioenergy CCS and DAX, and then try to figure out, especially when your tool will be available, to maybe do some kind of recalculations later on, just to see if the assumptions align with the official strategy. Maybe considering your wide palette of solutions, other CDRs are more preferable. And so we made an overestimation on our side on the role of bioenergy CCS, for example, right? On the other hand, the results from what were presented from COBISA cake indicatively showed that the bioenergy CCS role, especially in the combustion, not in aerobic digestion, actually, also, which is also discrepancy between the results here, is much higher, reaching up to even 18 million tons of CO2 per year in 2050. So as you can see, there is a big gap, but we did not look at all the other CDRs that you have identified, which means that there is still a need to pursue this further. Yeah, thank you. Well, the question was actually when the tools would be available. This was actually the question. Sorry for that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pavel. Super interesting intervention. Happy to hear about these developments, and also happy to recalculate with you guys to compare assumptions, because indeed, I think to give you a better read of what happened, we used to have more, let's say, optimistic assumptions on the rate at which Poland would be available to develop transport and storage infrastructure. And then in the external review process towards the end of the report, I think several reviewers invited us to be more cautious, particularly for 2030, but then that also sort of impacted 2050, to not be too optimistic on that. But very much agree that for a country like Poland, BECCS makes a lot of sense because you can produce energy and CDR potentially at the same time. And Poland also has a long way to go to decarbonize its grid, so that could play several roles at the same time. So the toolkit itself, sorry for the background noise. I think it's okay. The toolkit we will publish towards the end of June, normally. And there will be a dedicated website as well. So I think this is a good time to maybe re-engage around that. And yes, I think, again, these assumptions, we change them to adjust to what we've collected from the external reviewers. But I think, you being at the CCUS platform, we can use different assumptions and see what would be the new numbers. Also, the volumes you're mentioning don't seem very far. So I think there's definitely a debate to have because these two things we connect. Thanks very much. I'm aware we are at time, but if there is another one or two questions, maybe we can stay over a little bit. And I'm afraid I don't see the hand raised. So if Lydia or Martina, you can tell me. Otherwise,
No, there are no more hands, so I think it's a good time to wrap up.
Okay, cool. Then, I would like to thank again, first our partners, Sweco, the whole team behind this report. Really, this was a huge effort. We are really happy to publish that. And then also all the participants for joining us today and listening to this session. It's been recorded, so it will be made available. The report is now available on Carbon Cap's website as well. You can go and download it. And yeah, with that, we wish you a very good rest of the day and happy to follow up with those of you interested via email or whichever channel you prefer. Thanks a lot and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.